Diane is 62 years old. She has been a dental hygienist for 34 years in the same building, cleaning more or less the same set of mouths in the same town. On a Tuesday night, after dinner, she does the thing she does about once a week. She opens the app for her retirement account, she looks at the number, and she feels her stomach drop. The number is $264,000. Then she closes the app, because looking at it longer doesn't make it bigger. Here is what Diane believes about that number. She believes it is the answer to the question, am I going to be okay? She believes that $264,000 is small, frightening, and basically the whole story of her retirement. And she is wrong about all three things, not because she's bad at math, but because she is staring at one number when her retirement is actually decided by 5. The other 4 are bigger than the one she keeps checking. By the end of this video, we are going to add up all 5 for Diane, and the total is going to be more than 2.5 times the number that has been ruining her Tuesday nights. She isn't behind. She just can't see most of what she owns. I'm Tom. This channel is about real personal finance for normal people, the kind without motivational fluff and without fantasy returns, where we just look at what the math actually does over time. Today the math says something almost nobody believes about their own retirement, which is that you are probably going to land richer than the number in your account is telling you. If you want the honest version of that, the version with the receipts, hit subscribe and stick with me. Let me start with the mistake, because it's the same mistake almost everybody makes. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. When you want to know how wealthy you are, you check your retirement account balance. That feels right. It's a big number. It has your name on it. It goes up and down with the market. The problem is that your account balance is not your retirement net worth. It's closer to the cash in your wallet. If you opened your wallet right now and found $40, you would not conclude that you are worth $40. You'd remember the house, the car, the checking account, the paycheck coming Friday. But when people look at retirement, they forget all of that. They pull out the wallet, see the cash, and panic. And here's the quiet irony in Diane's case. That $264,000 she's convinced is shamefully small is actually ahead of most people her age. Vanguard's How America Saves report for 2026 puts the typical 401k balance for people in their late 50s and early 60s at around $100,000, even counting every retirement account together. The Federal Reserve's Survey of Consumer Finances puts the typical household in that age range near $185,000. Diane is above both. She's not the cautionary tale of her friend group, she only thinks she is. Because she's been measuring her one visible number against a scary headline figure instead of against the people actually sitting next to her. So let me give you the thing you should be looking at instead. I call it the 5-line ledger. It's just a list of every resource that actually pays for your retirement, and there are 5 lines on it. Line 1 is the only one you ever check. Lines 2 through 5 are the ones that decide whether you're fine, and almost nobody adds them up. Let me walk you through them, because 4 of the 5 are probably bigger than you think, and at least one of them is going to surprise you. Line 2. The biggest asset most people own is one they think they don't have. Social Security. I know. The second I say those words, half of you mentally check out, because Social Security feels like a small monthly check, not wealth. Let me change how you see it. Right now, the average retired worker gets about $2,000 a month from Social Security. That number adjusts upward for inflation every single year. This past January, it went up 2.8% automatically, so the money keeps its buying power as prices rise. So ask yourself a different question. If you wanted to buy that exact thing on the open market, an income of about $2,000 a month, guaranteed for the rest of your life, that rises with inflation so it never loses value, what would it cost you? The answer is somewhere around $400,000 to $450,000. That is roughly what that income would cost to replace on the open market, the price tag on a lifetime of inflation-protected payments that size. You may not be able to walk into a bank tomorrow and buy exactly that. And honestly, the fact that it's so hard to buy is part of what makes it so valuable, but as a measure of what the asset is worth, the number is real. Which means your Social Security is not a small monthly check. It is economically identical to owning a $400,000 bond, one of the safest, most valuable bonds in the entire world. Except it doesn't show up on any statement. so you never count it. You own a $400,000 asset and you've been walking around feeling broke. And here is why that asset is worth so much. There's no ordinary investment you can buy that does what Social Security does. A regular bond pays you for a set number of years and then stops. A stock can be cut in half in a bad year. Cash quietly bleeds value to inflation. Social Security pays you every single month until the day you die. However long that takes, and it lifts the payment as prices rise so it never shrinks against your grocery bill. The only other product on earth that does all of that at once costs a small fortune to buy, which is exactly the point. You already own the expensive thing. You were just handed it so slowly, one payroll deduction at a time across 30 years, that you never once registered it as wealth. And that's for one person. Take my neighbors, Carl and Linda, the retired plumber, and the retired school teacher I've mentioned before. They each get a Social Security check. 2 average checks, inflation protected, paid until whichever of them lives longer. Because that income has to cover 2 lives and the last one standing can live a very long time, the replacement value lands around $800,000 or more. Carl and Linda have a paid-off duplex in Pittsburgh and a retirement account that, by the panic standards of the internet, looks modest. They also quietly own an $800,000 bond that no app will ever display for them. When Linda told me she was worried they hadn't saved enough, I had her run this number, and she went quiet for about a minute. The asset was there the whole time. She just had never been told to write it down. So that's line 2, and for most people it is the single largest thing they own, larger than the account they keep staring at. Now line 3, which is an asset hiding inside an expense. Line 3, the mortgage that disappears. Housing is the biggest single expense in almost every American household. The latest government spending data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics for 2024 shows the typical household spends about $26,000 a year on it, which is a full third of everything they spend. And the heaviest piece of that for anyone who still owes on a home is the mortgage payment. Now here's the thing about a mortgage, it ends. You make the last payment and a giant monthly cost that you've carried for decades simply vanishes from your life. Think about what that does. Say your mortgage payment is $1,400 a month. The day it's gone, you need $1,400 a month less to live the exact same life. Same house, same neighborhood, same everything, just $16,800 a year cheaper to be you. Now, how much money would you need invested to throw off $16,800 a year safely? Using the standard rule that you can pull about 4% a year from a portfolio, the answer is $420,000. So paying off your mortgage before retirement is mathematically the same as adding a $420,000 portfolio. It lowers the bill instead of raising the balance, but the effect on whether you can afford your life is identical. And it's worth 400 grand. I want to be fair here, because a paid-off house is not free. You still owe property taxes, insurance, and the occasional new roof. But the big monthly payment, the one that ate a quarter of your income for years, is gone for good. People know their house is paid off. They just never connect it to the retirement math. So it sits there as a nice fact instead of as the giant tailwind it actually is. Quick thing before line 4. I'm curious where you are in this, so do me a favor and drop a comment with just your line 1 number, your account balance. And I'll tell you in the replies which of the other 4 lines you're probably underestimating. I read them. It's usually line 2. Line 4, the number in your head is frozen, but your money isn't. Here's a small mental trick your brain plays on you. When you imagine your retirement, you take today's balance and you basically freeze it there. Diane sees $264,000 and some part of her pictures walking into retirement with $264,000. But she's 62, she's still working, still contributing, and that money is still invested and still growing the entire time. The number isn't frozen. She is treating a moving thing as if it stopped. Let me make that concrete with a different person. Say you're 55, you've got $150,000 in your 401k, and you feel hopelessly behind. You keep doing the panic math of, I have $150,000 and I'm almost out of time. But you're not stopping. Say you keep putting in about $600 a month, your employer adds a match on top, and it all grows at a normal long-run rate. 10 years later, at 65, that $150,000 is not $150,000. It's about $370,000. You more than doubled it, and you barely felt it happen because most of the growth came from money you already had quietly compounding while you went to work and lived your life. The frozen number in your head was off by more than $200,000, and it was off in your favor the entire time. This is line 4. Whatever number scared you, it's already out of date because the money kept moving after you looked away. Line 5. You are going to spend less than you think, and that changes everything. This is the one people argue with me about, so let me bring receipts. There's a belief baked into almost every retirement calculator that you'll spend the same amount every year until you die. Maybe more once you add medical costs. The actual data says something very different. The government tracks what households spend by age, and the pattern is clear and consistent. A household run by someone age 45 to 54, peak career, peak kids, peak everything, spends about $100,000 a year on average. Move to 55 to 64, and it drops to about $85,000. Hit 65 to 74, the first real chunk of retirement, and it falls to about $65,000. And past 75, it drops again to about $56,000. From the peak years to the late years, average household spending falls by more than 40%. That is not people being forced into poverty, that is what naturally happens. The kids move out, the house gets paid off, the commuting ends, and you start buying fewer suits and a lot more slippers. You travel hard for the first stretch of retirement, and then, honestly, you slow down. Because a 78-year-old just doesn't want to do as much as a 68-year-old. Researchers who study this have a name for it. They call the first chunk of retirement the go-go years. When you're newly free and spending on travel and grandkids and the things you waited 40 years to do. Then come the slow-go years, when you're still active but you've done the big trips and you stay closer to home. And then the no-go years, when life gets quieter on its own and spending settles down to the basics. Your money doesn't have to fund one expensive year repeated 30 times. It has to fund a curve that bends downward, and a downward curve is a far cheaper thing to pay for. Retirement spending isn't a flat line. It's a slide that drifts lower as you age, which means the scary target you calculated, the one based on spending $100,000 a year forever, is describing a version of your life that doesn't actually happen. Your real spending shrinks while you're busy worrying that it won't. And every dollar your spending drops is a dollar your savings no longer has to cover. The finish line is quietly walking toward you while you run at it. Now let me do the thing I promised. Let me build Diane's real 5-line ledger and add it up, because this is where it stops being theory. Line 1, the number she stares at, is $264,000. That's where her panic lives. But Diane plans to work to 67, 5 more years, and she's still contributing. So by the time she actually retires, line 1 isn't $264,000. With 5 more years of contributions and normal growth, it's about $391,000. That's the real starting number, not the one that ruins her Tuesdays. Line 2 is her Social Security. As a modest lifelong earner, her benefit at 67 comes to about $2,000 a month, inflation protected for life. Capitalized as a bond, the way we did earlier, that's worth roughly another $390,000 in real assets. So before we go any further, Diane controls close to $780,000 of retirement resources, which is already nearly 3 times the number she thought was her whole story, lined free as her house. Diane paid off her modest 3-bedroom 2 years ago. That paid-off home means her housing payment is gone, so her required spending in retirement is dramatically lower than the calculators assume. Line 4 took care of itself since her balance grew while she kept working, and line 5 is the spending slide. Diane doesn't need $100,000 a year. With a paid-off house, as a single person, she spends about $3,300 a month, around $40,000 a year, and that number will drift down as she ages, not up. So here's Diane's actual situation. Her Social Security covers about $2,000 of her $3,300 monthly spending. The gap she needs her own money to fill is about $1,300 a month. To safely cover a $1,300 a month for life, she needs roughly $390,000 invested. She is going to have about $391,000. Diane is not behind. Diane is essentially exactly on target with a paid-off house as a cushion on top. And she's spent years terrified because she was comparing one of her 5 numbers against a $1.46 million figure from a survey. That has nothing to do with her actual life. The math was never scary. She was just only looking at 1/5 of it. Now I have to be honest with you, because the whole point of this channel is that I don't sell you a fantasy. This does not mean everyone is secretly fine and nobody needs to save. If your line 1 is genuinely near 0, the other 4 lines help, but they don't perform a miracle and you have real work to do. What I'm telling you is narrower and more useful than relax. I'm telling you that the gap between how poor you feel and how prepared you actually are is usually enormous, and it runs in your favor, and feeling poorer than you are is not harmless. Here's why it's not harmless. People who feel broke make broke decisions. The most expensive one is claiming Social Security at 62 out of pure fear. If your full benefit at 67 would be $2,000 a month, claiming at 62 permanently cuts it to about $1,400. That's $600 a month less every month for the rest of your life. Over a 25-year retirement, panic claiming early can quietly cost you around $180,000 in income you'll never get back. And people do it specifically because a balance on a screen scared them into grabbing money early. Others grind on for years in a job they've come to hate, when the full ledger said they could have walked away already. And plenty cash out their investments at the worst possible moment, because dread is loud and a balance sitting quietly on a screen is easy to ignore. The cost of not counting your real wealth isn't just stress. It's worse decisions made from a worse mental place that follow you for decades. Accurate numbers, even when they're tight, beat vague terror every single time. I did this exact exercise on myself years ago, back when I was still convinced I was behind, no matter how much I saved. I wrote down all 5 lines for the first time: the account, the Social Security, the paid-off house, the contributions still flowing, the spending that would fall instead of rise. And the total was so far above the single number I'd been white-knuckling that I had to sit with it. Nothing about my finances had changed that day. I just finally counted what was already mine. That's the day the fear let go, and it's a big part of why I was able to stop working on my own terms. So, here's the one thing I want you to do this week. Don't check your balance. You do that already, and it only ever shows you line 1. Instead, get a piece of paper and write down all 5 lines. Your account balance, your Social Security estimate, which you can pull for free at ssa.gov, and then roughly 400 times your monthly benefit to see it as the asset it is. Whether your mortgage will be gone by retirement, what your balance grows to if you keep contributing, and what you'll honestly spend once the kids and the commute and the mortgage are behind you. Add them up. For most of you watching, the number at the bottom is going to be bigger than the one that's been scaring you, and a lot of that fear is going to quietly walk out of the room. You're probably retiring richer than you think. You just have to count all of it.